So firstly, I think you'll agree 20 minutes is far too short to address something like this and try and reference all the fantastic conversations we've had today. I'm going to just try my best to do it in the shortest space of time. I think, where we find ourselves at the sort of split, at a confluence of activity and the need to sort of protect water resources. I'm glad this topic is here because it's come at a very a very important time. We've seen just from our own experiences recently, Cape Town having to grapple with day zero and build in resilience around that. Johannesburg, if anyone is from Joburg at the moment, you probably have water more. You probably don't have water more than you have it in certain areas. Of course, I saw profit. And it gave me a bit of a wobble when I saw it, because when I saw profit, the first thing that comes to mind is the water tanker mafia, right? I mean, if you want to see someone who is profiting from water in South Africa, those that have won tenders to deliver water to communities is a prime example. So just with that in mind, I mean, Garen, how would you elaborate on setting the scene in our water scarcity journey in South Africa, and maybe just touch on the corporate side of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, as an environmental lawyer, I do a lot of water law. I did a master's in water law. So I feel the frustration for corporates. I've dealt with many private sector projects where companies have tried to become more water resilient. They've tried to set up their own water treatment facilities, wastewater treatment facilities. And I feel like there's two major stumbling blocks to the market, specifically on the private side. We can talk about the public sector side separately, but on the private sector side, almost every single one of the projects I've worked on fell apart because of the price of water. The pricing just doesn't stack up. And if you want a water project to be bankable, it just doesn't happen. And there are many legacy issues for that in Africa. I think our governments have kept water too cheap because they've wanted to give water to the general populace. But as a result, it doesn't help with the bankability of projects. And then secondly, our regulatory environment is not conducive to the private sector entering into the market. It's too complicated to get the approvals for private sector projects to set up. And as a result, everyone just walks away from the project. And it's really frustrating.
Alex, perhaps to add on that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Let's talk on the government side, if you will.
And the problem is, I think that the water sector in Africa and in South Africa is chronically underfunded. This is not about profit. This is about financial survival and sustainability. This is about utilities that sell water at a quarter of what it costs them to actually provide it to you. This is about water revenues that are not kept for the water business of a utility, but go towards roads and housing, etc. But water is absolutely essential. So this is about actually knowing that we have to find ways to make the water sector financially viable. Where people can afford to pay, they need to pay. Because if you don't do that, you will just get a very slow degradation of infrastructure, or a very rapid degradation. You will have water scarcity, you have outages. It's just not a model that can work. We have to find ways to make the water sector financially viable.
I mean, what is the next step for government? I mean, and let's maybe talk ideal, because that would be great to talk on. But and obviously, in our current environment, and we've seen the political change start to come into effect as a result of water outages. If we just see the community activism in parts of Johannesburg as a result of water outages, that looks like it will, in our upcoming local government elections, force, I don't want to say regime change, because we're not there. We're not that sort of democracy, but certainly a change of political parties and alignment.
Well, I mean, we've got to start with basic things. So on the one hand, water conservation effectively can pay for itself. It's not actually that expensive. It can now free up very valuable resources in water scarce cities, water scarce countries. So you start with the basics. You need better, like very simple things like credit control, billing, making sure that you can start to understand that water is a critical economic asset. And then from there, you can start to think about partnerships. You can think about new enablers. Yeah. The corporate sector obviously can play a role in institutional strengthening. But the end goal for government must be institutional strengthening, financial strengthening, consumers that understand the value of water, and politicians that also obviously understand the value of water. If you can get that right, you can start to make progress in small incremental steps, I would think.
You mentioned billing, and sorry, just as a reminder, questions are open. Please do ask, and we'll try and address as many as we can. You mentioned billing, and it made me immediately think of our discussion yesterday around the rapid evolution rollout of mini grids across large parts of the continent. The AI featured very strongly in our debates and as a way for Africa to make that leap. You know, at that level of being able to track and monitor water consumption in less advanced areas or less infrastructure-rich areas. You know, and this is to both of you, what do you see as the potential opportunities, firstly, for the state to drive the legislation and the enablers to encourage innovation at the private sector level that would, you know, bring down costs and bring in profitability as a question?
Look, there are some green shoots out there. We're definitely seeing some projects in that space.
And please provide examples. That would be great to see.
I think the one that comes to mind, there's a World Bank project in Uganda, and it's an outcome-based financing solution. And effectively, the parties that get the financing have to prove that they actually connect people to water. And based on true connections, they can get their payment. And there's an incentive or a premium for how rural the areas are in terms of access to the water and sanitation services. So there are some innovative solutions coming out there. And I think from a regulatory perspective, one of the trickiest things I find in the water space, having structured large-scale PPP projects in the energy space as well, is that energy is done at a central level. You have major utilities doing it, whereas water is decentralized into municipalities, into regional bodies, etc. And it's really hard then to do localized, large-scale PPP models. What we're seeing, at least in South Africa and some other African jurisdictions, is that national is actually stepping in. Okay. Where the municipalities are not actually delivering, national is stepping in and actually doing it. But that does require some legal changes that to be made, because historically, obviously, municipalities must provide the basic needs and services at their areas. But when they're not doing it, national has to step in and actually do something about it.
I think at a continental level, I mean, I think there's two things we definitely, and I agree with all of that, but we'd have to look at. I think one is there are community-based approaches that actually do work in parts of Africa. I think one of the things to recognize is there is a willingness to pay for water in Africa. The willingness to pay is not zero. A lot of the time, people have to pay water vendors at a much higher price than they would like to. So we've seen community-based approaches in parts of rural Africa where if you understand the community structure, you strengthen the community structure, you know what their willingness to pay is, you can work out a financial model where you can pay for the upfront development of your capital expenditure for water treatment, the operational expenditure. Everybody can benefit. They budgeted for maintenance. That's one way you're going to have to solve for water access in Africa. You're not going to, government-led approaches on the whole are very important, but will not solve for every single context. So those community-based examples exist all over Africa. We've been great lessons learned in that space. But the other one, I think, is this, how you harness the private sector and private capital. And there it's a case of the state may not be able to provide water sustainably to their population. That exists in many, many jurisdictions. But can they build enough capacity to at least manage a PPP or a private party to do that on their behalf? If they're not strong enough, they won't get enough accountability from the private party. They won't be able to set a proper performance-based contract in place. But if they can just get the procurement and the oversight right, there are examples in South Africa, for example, the concessions we run, where you can actually get good private sector buy-in, good private sector delivery. They can extend free basic water. They can provide more reliable service. So you get the private sector capital and expertise, but the state is still a counterpart. It still keeps them in check. It makes sure that the accountability is there. So if you could just solve for that part of the state, you could unlock so much more value in the water sector.
And there are good examples. I mean, if you look in Senegal, there's a PPP in Dakar that was issued out a 10-year concession. And what's quite unique in a PPP, we classically think of big infra, right? This is just a concession to distribute the water. And it's taken the access to water in Dakar up from, I think it was 57% to 98%. So if the PPP is structured very carefully with the right checks and balances in place, you can have very good access to water.
I see there's a question from the audience, and this is a tricky one. Is it contradictory to focus on profitability in water, considering that approach, commercializing of a natural resource, can clash with sustainability goals?
I don't think this is about, for me, this is not about commercializing water. As I said, this is actually about just trying to have some kind of a cost-reflective tariff that allows you to provide water. And also, of course, to cross-subsidize the poor, which is, of course, what you would do in many instances as well. So I don't think this is not about trying to make profit out of, in fact, viable municipalities and water institutions, the strengthening of those water institutions will reduce the reliance on, the water mafia and except tankers that you spoke about. So I think it's much more about actually, if we can just strengthen institutions we have, if we're corporates, we should not be trying to obviously make profit out of water.
Yeah.
We should be thinking, where in our operations can we be good water citizens? Where can we look in our supply chain, our entire value chain? How do we get our own house in order?
Yeah.
And then beyond the fence line, what can I do in water stewardship where actually I'm part of the solution? I'm strengthening local water institutions. I'm strengthening local water communities. I'm looking for sustainable approaches to provide water for decades. That's definitely not a profit conversation. That's a risk management. That's a community development. That's a supply chain management process.
And I think if you've undervalued the resource, that's when the economics fail.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we have with water at the moment.
Yeah.
The cost of treating dirty mine water to become potable water again is incredibly expensive, but the cost that we can currently charge for that water doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
So the projects do fail. So I think you do need to take into account the vulnerable out there. You need to make sure that the vulnerable areas of the community get cheaper water, but the other more affluent and communities and companies must pay for the true value of that water.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so. Maybe the profitability as a concept is not we want to sort of be profiting off those vulnerable communities, but you want to encourage a profit motive such that you bring the innovation that will bring down costs, make project financing more of an option. I agree with one of the questions. Such a pity that government is not part of the discussion, but. What is their appetite for PPPs? We've seen in many of the other South African sort of network industries. Stephen Curtis wrote about it yesterday about evolution in rail and road. Our port infrastructure is certainly, and we spoke about it yesterday about not privatization. I'm not going to use that word. I was told not to, but
it's not appropriate.
Private participation. What is government's current appetite for engaging in PPPs at a water level?
I mean, I'll start. This, I would say in the last year, we've seen more proposals and requests, RFPs for water projects, PPP projects, than I've ever seen in my career. And it's coming from all sectors, facets of the water market. So from the wastewater side to the extraction and treatment side to the bulk infrastructure side, I've never seen anything like this before. So there's certainly appetite, but PPPs take a long time. So we're still a long way away from seeing those projects.
Can I, if I may, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that PPPs are a spectrum. So, where you have like very limited private sector involvement on the one hand and full-scale privatization on the other. Now, full-scale privatization would not be appropriate in the African context at all. The closest you would get would be a concession model where you have significant private sector involvement. And just to say that in South Africa, for example, there are two very well-functioning concessions, water concessions, already in place. Now, they were set up many decades ago, one in the North Coast and one in Mbombela, but we already have existing water PPPs that are up and running. The Johannesburg water management contract, which ran for about 7 years, raised efficiency, raised performance within Joburg Water. It's a pity that we haven't actually been able to support that process further. So the one point is we already have good water PPP practice in, for example, South Africa, and we heard about other countries in Africa. Secondly, there are additional green shoots. So you may have heard of the Water Partnerships Office. It's based in the DBSA. They are working through, their whole reason for being is to build a pipeline of PPP projects in water reuse, and water conservation, etc. So I think it is difficult to get them through the process, but the necessity is just undeniable. Many municipalities just do not have the balance sheets to fund water. They may have the capacity to procure, but not to actually manage their water mandate. So the need to leverage private capital and expertise, while obviously holding them to account, I think is paramount. So I agree. We will get an increase in this area in future.
I see we don't have that much time. A big theme of the past 2 days has been regional integration. We've heard progress, we've heard major roadblocks to success. I think we can't talk regional integration without regional water integration. What do you see as the most pressing needs, or what is going to accelerate or hinder regional integration relating to water usage, community empowerment in that space?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Look, the thing is, water is tricky, right? When you understand water law, it crosses provincial boundaries, it crosses state boundaries.
Yeah.
So law doesn't really assist us in terms of the management of the water, and hence why you do need regional solutions. Like the Nile Basin is a classic example. You've got 10 countries that are collaborating to protect that water resource, to sort out the allocation of the water out of the Nile, to share the data that's coming out of the monitoring of that system. And you need that because that river supports those 10
years. Yeah. Another example is in Ethiopia with the Renaissance Dam. The way it works there is with that integrated sectors. They didn't just build it out. They solved for the lining, they solved the agricultural industry, they solved for many other sectors, as well as building a big scale water project. So I think you need to come up with collaborative agreements between countries, and then you need to have cross-sectoral approach to try.
Yeah, we also got upsea, resources that time are limited. So I mean, if I think about the South African context, which is also regional though, is our water source areas. So for the first part, you have to understand what are the most priority with stress areas and where does your water actually come from. In our case, our critical water catchments are providing 50% of our water. But some of that, for example, is shared with the Suchi. So immediately it says, okay, we have to focus on how we ensure the protection of our critical catchments, and we also have to do it in a way that looks at regional cooperation. So I did prioritize, understand where it comes from, and then engage in a cooperative way.
Final thoughts. What is our, pressing needs? What is our next step in our journey?
From my side, the regulation needs to be sorted out. We simplify on water laws across Africa. The bigger problem with Africa is we used first world laws, and we tried to implement it in third world countries. I mean, South African's legislation is based off cannabis acts. It's not workable. It doesn't take into account the local complexities, the local issues. So we need to help flush. We need to come up with innovative models at national level to guarantee some of these projects, to fund some of these projects. And then we need to sort out our compliance and enforcement, as well as speeding up things like our dispute resolution mechanisms. We use certain water tribunals for years sometimes. Years you have to kill hurt, and it just doesn't help the residents.
For me, I can't get away from this, but that we have to strengthen our water institutions, whether it's through soft skills or hard skills, so that they can enact their mandates, at least use the large number of incentives that they should actually provide the citizen. Part of that is, if you're a corporate, how can I support the water institutions that are really critical to me? How can I support the CBO, which are the community-based organizations, so they can help make municipalities and others accountable? So I think whenever we do it, the long-term goal must be to strengthen our water institutions. Yeah, that includes from a financial perspective. That's the only way I think we really get equitable, sustainable water access.
Thank you very much. I think important browsing that I know we got a packed day ahead. So this panel, thank you for joining us, and if we give them a warm round of applause.